How would it feel for you to have to consider moving back to America?
Andrew, it's such a strange thing because it's still my home and I miss it. And just driving through the countryside on my way to visit my favorite cousin, I guess, was that just last week? There is such a feeling of that being my home. Germany will never feel like my home, but I am so grateful to have a place here where I don't have to worry about my insurance and getting the health care that I need. As a diabetic, that's extraordinarily important. I have absolutely no intention of ever returning to the U.S.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. Today's podcast episode is a bit different. I have friends and neighbors who have moved out of the United States over the past 12 months, and I know many more who are talking about it. So I'm interviewing a friend who has been living in Berlin, Germany for the past 13 years. His name is Daniel Gundlach, and he is a former professional classical singer and accompanist who today hosts a podcast called Counter Melody. The Counter Melody podcast is focused primarily on opera singers of the past century that may not have received the attention that they deserved. I know Daniel because at one point in my life, I pursued a professional classical singing career, and he was my voice teacher while I was living in New York City 20 years ago. Today, we talk about his life and career, but we also discuss the trials and tribulations of being an American immigrant in Germany. Daniel Gundlach, welcome to the podcast.
Andrew, I can't tell you how thrilled I am to be here. I'm quite honored to be on your podcast.
Well, thank you so much. I am very happy to have you here. We will be talking about your podcast as well, Counter Melody, which I have been a listener since the beginning.
Yes, you have.
But let's get started talking about you. So where were you born?
I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
What was your childhood like?
Oh, my. It was a challenging childhood, many, many happy memories. My beloved grandfather died quite suddenly before I turned 6. And this was a devastating thing for me because, they always talk about children needing to have an advocate, someone who actually sees them. And that makes a childhood manageable, tolerable, survivable. And he was my person. And one day he was there, and the next day he wasn't.
You have brothers and sisters.
Oh, far too many of them. I'm number 2 of 5. My father was a Missouri Synod Lutheran minister, and so, they firmly believed in the dictum, be fruitful and multiplied, because there was a lot of fruit, and some of it fell pretty close to the tree, and other of it, like me, ended up in a different universe.
You're in Germany now. So
I am.
You have the last name.
And you're sitting in my apartment here in Berlin. Yeah.
So I guess what I'm getting at is was it a German family? I mean, did you come from a German family? Do you know you were from a German family?
Oh, I know I'm from a German family on both sides. Yeah. And we were always taught to be very proud of our German heritage. But it was kind of a limited view of being German. It was like, sort of bratwurst and beer and all of that. But, when I found out about the Holocaust when I was 12 years old, that was something I couldn't exactly be proud of. That caused me a lot of trouble.
Did you talk about it with your parents?
My mother recommended to me that I read The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. And she has since said to my younger brother, with whom I'm very close, that's when all the trouble started with Daniel. I should have never told him to read that book. Well, then I started questioning everything, as if I weren't already questioning everything, because I knew from a very young age that I was gay. I just didn't have a word to attach to it, but I knew that I was different. And I knew that the way in which I was different was something that was really bad.
With a Lutheran.
With that kind of a background, yes.
I'm wondering, did you know you were different before the age of 6 and you felt like your grandfather saw the difference and still loved you?
Yes,
That's true.
emphatically so.
And when he left, it was you didn't have someone who saw you for you and loved you.
That's right. And I know that my grandfather had emotional issues. And so he was somebody who I think recognized the emotional instability or frailty or fragility, whatever. He recognized that in me. And it was something that we shared, honestly. I don't really talk about that with family members. My older brother's the only one who even remembers him anyway.
Did you grow up playing the piano?
My father, his godmother died, and she had a piano that the family wanted to get rid of. And so they offered it to my father for cheap. And so they bought this piano. And my grandfather had already died. And we had moved to the next place. We tended to move quite frequently. So we were in the second family home at that point. And I remember we got that piano and I sat down and I just by ear played My Country 'Tis of Thee, Sweet Land of, because I played it in F. And so I figured out, what those black keys were about.
It sounds like if your family hadn't been given the piano that you might not have found the instrument.
Oh, I might not have found the instrument, but I had already found music. And in fact, I was so drawn to it. I was very young and I went down to the basement and I found all of these LPs. Well, I didn't know what those things were. We didn't have a record player. And so I remember I was attracted to one in particular. It was called Aida for Orchestra. It was Andrei Kostelanets and his orchestra. Well, it didn't have any singing on it, but it had this picture of this woman in, I guess we'd call it light Egyptian makeup now. And my mother also had a copy of this book called The Victor Book of the Opera. I still have it. It was my father's Christmas gift to my mother the first year that they were married. While they were dating, they went to the drive-in to see Aida starring Sophia Loren. And I was to find out the voice of Renata Tebaldi. So that's why they had the Victor Book of the Opera. That's why they had Aida Opera for Orchestra, because my mother was quite taken with the pomp and circumstance of this film. And so I think she also was kind of fixated on the idea that they get smothered in a tomb at the end of it. So I already knew a little bit about opera. I'd never heard opera until my father was studying his sermon one Saturday up in his study. We had this little bungalow house, and he was in his office up there, and he had a radio, and he was listening to the Metropolitan Opera broadcast, and they were playing Aida. And so he called me up to his study to hear part of it, and it happened to be the beginning of Act 3. And it happened to be Leontyne Price singing Aida. I still can barely think about it without just almost bursting into tears. My whole being, my whole life just opened up from that moment. So in spite of all of the issues that I had with my family, with my father later on, after I came out and all of that, what he gave me that gift unintentionally. He had no idea that it would be so transformative in my life, but there you have it. Sometimes gifts come from places where we don't expect them,
When did you find out you were diabetic?
I was in high school, and I was not feeling well. I remember my mother taking me to the pediatrician. I was maybe my senior or junior year in high school, and they couldn't find anything wrong with me, but I knew I wasn't well. Well, right after I left for college, that was such a tumultuous time anyway. And so I got really, really sick. If it had been latent, it became full blown at that point. And so I was diagnosed within the first 6 weeks of being away at college.
Where did you go to college?
Well, I went to St. Olaf College my first year, and then I transferred to Ripon College the following year and finished my undergrad there.
I met you years later, and following you on social media, I mean, I know that your diabetes has been a constant. It's something that's with you forever.
It is.
And so in my mind, I feel like it would be like a traumatic diagnosis, especially I don't know how many years ago that was.
I was not even 18 years old. Let's just say it was decades and decades and decades ago.
So,
but the thing
did you
is,
know that it was a big deal? That diagnosis was a big deal?
the other big deal was happening for me simultaneously, and that was coming to grips with the fact that I was incontrovertibly homosexual. And I mean, the two things really manifested themselves at exactly
you can't think
the
of
same
one
time.
without the other. I do have to ask about what year we're talking about, because it does matter.
No, it does matter. It was
pre-AIDS.
1978.
Okay.
Look, I was in undergraduate. My senior year of college, I subscribed to The Advocate, and I happened to read about that rare cancer found in homosexuals, and that was my senior year of college. So yeah, AIDS was not a thing yet. Yeah.
I assume that the tumult around accepting your sexuality stemmed from a very religious upbringing with a pastor father.
That and that alone.
You came out to yourself your freshman year of college, basically.
Yes, and I think I told two people, friends, and then I ended up telling a sympathetic religion professor. He was this young gay guy, and he was very kind. And what he told me was because I had already planned on transferring, and he said I was doing the right thing because it wasn't an embracing environment there.
At St. Olaf. So, were you a music major?
I was.
So you kind of knew from the beginning it's what you wanted to do.
It's the only thing that ever made any sense to me in my life was music.
And were you singing then, or just piano?
I sang from the time that I was just a child, but never had any aspirations professionally. And when I played, for instance, again, my father happened to get a congregant offered him a trumpet for $50, which they bought because they thought, well, now you can play in the band or whatever. And I said, I wanted oboe, because to me, that was the instrument that sounded most like the human voice. And they said, you can't have an oboe. It's a trumpet or nothing. I was always drawn to the human voice from the time that I heard Leontyne singing. And then I started checking records out from the library. So I checked out all of these recordings, all of the opera stuff, anything with a human voice singing, preferably classical. But yeah, it was just...
So you were already learning the repertoire at age 10 on your own?
Oh, absolutely. Pelléas was my favorite opera from the very beginning, and that's a rather esoteric work. Let's just put it for that, for people who are not opera fans.
Debussy. Yeah. So you were piano performance, vocal performance, or what was your main?
My undergraduate degree was just piano performance. But although I was just a music major, they didn't have even specialties. It was much too small a department for that sort of thing.
And did you go direct to graduate school from there?
I took a year, and I had a boyfriend at that point who got a teaching position at St. Olaf College for 1 semester. So I ended up moving back to the place where when I left, I swore I would never go back. So for my gap year, I didn't get accepted to study with my teacher, John Wilsman, the first time I auditioned. So I went in musicology. And if anybody knows anything about me, musicology was a really bad fit for me. And so I spent all of my time practicing the piano the first semester, praying to whatever entity might or might not be out there that I would be accepted into Westman's studio the second time.
Where was Westman at that time?
That was a University of Illinois in Urbana. That's where, and that's where my boyfriend was going to get his DMA in choral conducting.
So you got into a studio, and I guess, I'm going to say some of the things wrong. So just occurred to me. Because I think of you as a voice teacher, you're a coach,
Andrew, it's been many years since I taught voice. Let me just tell you that.
Well, you're a
I tried to. I know you, and yes, and my most successful voice student, rather, I would say. Although you didn't end up pursuing a career in singing, but
did you know what you were going to do? Were you studying to be? Because he's famous as an accompanist, and
yes,
you were.
I very much
were going to be an accompanist.
Yes, because I didn't think I had any capability as a vocalist myself. I used to look. When I was growing up in high school, I would play Joan Sutherland, not that I'm that big a fan, but singing the mad scene from Lucia. And I would sing along in her octave with the high E flat. Would drive everybody in the house insane. And then the summer after my junior year, I think my parents finally said to me, "What are you going to do with all of this music stuff anyway?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to become a singer." I didn't even know where that came from. And I just said it off the top of my head, and they all started laughing at me. Because it was just like, you are such an annoyance with your voice. Why would you want to?
So when you were singing Lucia, with Joan Sutherland in her octave, did you sing that straight through, your voice changing, or?
My voice didn't change until later. It's an interesting question, though. It kind of changed a little bit, but it didn't really drop deeper, probably until after I left for college even.
So you were going to be an accompanist, you weren't a singer, but you had been singing.
But also, a really good friend and I would go to the opera rehearsal department, and we would just do soprano mezzo duets. And I got my master's at the University of Illinois. So I actually did a drag recital. I adopted this persona called Daniela della Scarpone, and we did a full evening of dramatic soprano arias with my friend accompanying me. So after I got my master's, I spent a year with the San Francisco Opera. I did the Maryland Opera program as an apprentice coach. And then they still had what they call the Western Opera Theater Tour, where it was a bus and truck tour where we took, that year it was Don Pasquale. And so we went around mostly the Western states. Anyway, it was a national tour that lasted most of the year. And when that was done, then I moved to New York.
So you're in New York, you start singing with the drag opera company.
Yes.
While your day job is accompanying?
What was I doing at that point? I think I was doing temp work at first. I've never made a lot of money in my life. I've always been on the absolute brink of poverty, but, I'm still here, as Carlotta would say. So anyway, whatever. But no, I played in a lot of voice studios. One of those teachers in whose studio I played became my first serious voice teacher. And her name was Joan Kaplan. She just recently died.
And when you studied with her, did you start studying right away as a countertenor?
Well, she refused to let me study with her at first.
As a countertenor?
Because I was singing with Granshena,
the drag opera company.
She thought it was just a joke. And plus that, I don't think she wanted to lose her pianist, I wasn't the only pianist, but, you'd go, I'd play a full day with her. I'd play 10 hours of voice lessons per day. And I get paid $10 an hour. That's what the rate was at that point.
So what made her decide that she would take you as a student?
She came to see me perform with Granshena.
Oh.
We did a one-off benefit, I think, at the Judson Church down in the village. Mm-hmm. She came to hear me, and I sang Amneris. And she was like, "Oh, my God, you're the real thing. Yes, I will help you." Yes, because I told her I wanted to become a professional countertenor. And it was so touching because, Andrew, I just was yesterday going through all of these materials that she produced to promote herself. And it was like what Joan students are doing. And it had me on there with all of the very earliest stuff that I was doing. And it was just like, wow, like stuff I was doing like 35 years ago.
Obviously, you were doing the drag stuff, but there's a difference between doing drag opera and doing legit countertenor.
That's why I
Helmet reeling.
That's why I quit Grand Chena, because I just felt like I was going to damage my voice. And I really wanted a chance to have a professional career as a countertenor. And this was before any of the big countertenors had actually appeared on the scene, a few years before people like Brian Athawa.
There requires a certain amount of confidence in who you are to walk out on the stage as a countertenor in the classical world.
This happened to me so often at the beginning of my career. I would enroll for these competitions, pay the fee, and they would refuse to let me participate because a countertenor was not considered to be a valid or legitimate voice type. That is emphatically so, because it was before David Daniels. When David Daniels appeared, suddenly it all became legitimized. He was the one. Now, of course, we know what happened to him, but honestly,
actually, I would say our listeners don't. So he's in prison, drugged people and raped them. I mean, if that's what he did.
That's what, he and his husband after the Xerxes in Houston.
So you talked a minute ago, you made sort of an offhand comment that you've never really had money. You know, you've always been, always kind of struggled, like never broke through. But I remember when I took lessons from you on the Upper West Side, I mean, you had a fabulous apartment. And you're living
It wasn't my apartment. I was living with my friend Gloria. You remember Gloria?
I do.
I'm in touch with her to this day.
And you have the fabulous apartment in Berlin. Like, you've made it work.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, I have a boyfriend. Well, he's not my boyfriend, but he's my partner. You know, I've always eked out an existence.
How did you decide to move to Berlin?
Gloria told me she was going to move, that she was leaving New York. She'd had it. She's still in the same apartment, by the way. And so I thought, oh my God, I've got to find another place to live. And I couldn't figure out how I could do that. I didn't want to be living with a stranger. And I was so Manhattan-centric. I didn't want to leave Manhattan. And to live alone and to come up with first and last month's rent and damage deposit and all of these things, it's very expensive, even if it had just been a question of meeting the monthly rent, which even just the initial outlay was impossible.
Well, was your primary income voice lessons or accompanying, or I mean, how are you supporting yourself?
I was working, just barely eking out an existence. I had a church job. I was working for this firm called Dick Moore and Associates. Dick Moore was a former child star. He was married to Jane Powell, and he was the editor of Equity News. So they hired me, and I did like 2 or 3 days a week there. I loved it. I didn't make much money at all. I did some voice teaching and coaching, and I was barely eking out an existence. So when Gloria told me she was going to move, I just thought, well, what am I going to do? By then, David, who was my most recent ex, was coming to Berlin a lot, and he had a fellowship at the Freie Universität. And every time he came on like a theater-going holiday here or to do a couple months of his fellowship, he had to get another Airbnb, and he just wanted to get a pied-à-terre here. So the summer of, I guess it would have been the summer of 2011, I came to visit him for a couple of weeks, and then I went home.
Friends. I mean, you'd been together.
We had broken up, and we had, healed whatever breach there was, and we're really very close again. And so he invited me to come and visit him. I did. And then I went back and Gloria told me she was going to leave and I had to find a new place to live. And Berlin just appeared in my mind. I thought, well, why not just get a place with David? So we tried a 3-month thing to see if we could get along without killing each other. And we found that we could live quite comfortably together and apart. And I mean, and that's how it's always been. And he's my family. That's how it's been ever since. Now he's retired. He taught at the Graduate Center for many years in New York. But yeah.
So what did he teach?
Theater studies.
When did the podcast start?
The podcast started in the fall of 2019.
And how long was it between moving to Berlin and starting the podcast?
Several years. I was trying to perform. And I started doing like a cabaret act kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a really good friend named Lloyd Ariola, and he was a pianist in New York. And I was trying to get him to move here, and we were going to do like
a show,
develop a show together. And then Lloyd died. He dropped dead on the hottest day of the year of a heart attack.
Oh my God.
And so that was that. And I don't know, it's just, to make ends meet as doing that kind of work here is nearly impossible because they have the German version of ASCAP. They keep such close tabs on every single song that is performed anywhere. They spy on cabarets and things. And if you've submitted a piece that isn't on your set list, the place gets fined and you get fined. And if you charge admission rather than simply passing a hat, then you
have to pay for the pieces that you perform.
Yes. And if you pass a hat, Germans are the stingiest. I performed with this drag queen named Destiny, and she was always the hostess for the evening. So she'd get a cut of the take. There would be me. There would be a pianist, and there might be another performer. That's dividing it 4 ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you had to divide with the house, too. And, when everybody's paying like €2 and you have 30 people in the audience.
You divide it by 5.
Yeah. I mean, it's
crazy.
crazy. You can't make ends meet. So I was doing a monthly show, and it wasn't rewarding. Mm-hmm. Because I ended up working with pianists that I didn't like. Mm-hmm. And that's when I decided I needed to train myself. Anyway, you were asking me about the podcast.
This is actually really interesting. So you were going to train yourself to accompany yourself? Is that
I did. I trained myself to do it. And then I had this accident where I nearly lost my finger. I went back to New York to perform at Lloyd's memorial concert. And while I was there, I had an accident with a ceiling fan that nearly sliced my finger off.
My God.
And so 3 surgeries later, I just realized I didn't really have a viable hand for playing the piano anymore. I tried.
Does it work now?
I don't play the piano anymore.
You don't?
No, never. You should see the dust that's on that piano. And it was just cleaned 2 weeks ago.
Ever since the accident?
More or less. Well, I tried. As I said, Andrew, I tried to do a little bit more performing. Mm-hmm. It wasn't lucrative and it wasn't rewarding. And the colleagues that I was working with it was
bad.
As the Germans say, it was a shit show. I mean, honestly, it wasn't to my liking. And so I realized I had to find something else to do. And I didn't even know what a podcast was until a couple of years before that. Then I became interested. I was listening to one called The Bowery Boys was an early one that's about New York history. And then the other one was called You Must Remember This. It's about Hollywood lore. So those were the 2 podcasts that I was listening to, and I loved them. Then I started listening to Serial, and I thought, well, I could maybe do a podcast about singers and singing. I didn't have any kind of example. It was just an idea in my head. And then I saw that this guy advertised on, I think it was on the online Musical America. Do you want to start a podcast? I can help you. And I was one of the tabs of the 50 tabs open on my laptop. And finally one day I just thought, I got to do something with this. And I wrote to him and he helped me get set up. He was a former bigwig with NPR, and he helped me just with the sort of nuts and bolts of it. He didn't end up having an active part in it, but boy, he encouraged me to just go ahead and do it. And I was putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And then I had this terrible experience where a friend was preparing to return to New York for several months. And I was going to go over and help her, like, get things squared away. And I said, I'll bring breakfast. So I mixed up some pancakes and I went over there and I took the batter and I cooked them up. We took one bite and we were just like, oh, I put so much baking soda in there. It was inedible. Being me, I was just so fucking stubborn. And a former boyfriend of mine says, oh, well, Dan, if ever he has a baking disaster, he'll turn it into muffins. And so that's basically what I did. I just thought my life is a complete and utter wreck. I started with that premise. And this pancake batter represents my life. And I am going to somehow, by hook or by crook, make that batter edible. And so I kept on having to add more flour and more milk or whatever. And finally, I was able to make a reasonable facsimile of an edible pancake. And that's when I thought to myself, you got to do this freaking podcast thing. And I started it the third week of September 2019. A few months later, we were in the middle of the pandemic and I had just started the podcast. So I still had something to keep me occupied. Everybody else was, just people going stir crazy.
It was
and I
timing.
did. It was, in effect, it was perfect timing.
So I'm going to speak about your podcast. I am not a completist. I have not listened to every episode. I listened to the early episodes. You were more likely to have clips and smaller excerpts. Now you're much more likely to play longer clips.
Well, at the beginning, I was so worried about copyright.
Oh.
And so I wasn't sure what the ramifications for all of that were. And I thought I had to do a lot more talking. So I just remember, like, when I, because I adored Shirley Verrett, and one of my first 10 episodes, I actually did, I think, 2 episodes on Shirley Verrett at the very beginning. And I was just playing little examples of her singing rather than full clips.
Right.
And now the way that I construct it is I choose a set list for whatever the subject is or the singer, whatever. Once I have a set list, then I know what the narrative arc of the podcast is going to be. And it can be whatever I want it to be. And sometimes I will sort of switch things around a little bit as I'm doing the narration. But once I have that done, then I sit down in front of the mic extemporaneously, no script, no nothing, and I just start talking.
That's very impressive.
Well, I do it because first of all, I love to talk, and I edit the hell out of it.
I was going to say, for listeners like who aren't familiar with your podcast, you feature singers that aren't the most famous. Like
sometimes,
Shirley Verrett is very, very famous.
If I'm going to do a Maria Callas episode, I have to have a specific take on her.
Right.
If I do Judy Garland, if I do Edith Piaf, if I do Shirley Verrett, any Leontyne Price, I have to have something specific to say. Otherwise, why say what's already been said? And I'll also take a singer whose reputation has suffered somewhat. Or sometimes I'll even take a singer that I don't like Anna Moffo. I could not stand her singing because I knew her late work.
Well, it's so funny because I immediately listened to that episode because
that's a really good episode.
Gay men at a certain age love Anna Moffo.
Well, she was glamour. She was, oh my God. Yes.
So good. I mean, and because my formative years, her and the Traviata, there was like a version, it was like highlights. It was kind of, that was my first
the recording with Robert Merrill and Richard Tucker.
Yes. And that was
my
introduction to the opera itself.
Absolutely. Well, anyway, my introduction to her was, heroines of French opera from the year 1975, I think, and the voice is completely destroyed. And so that's what I always had. I used to imitate her voice at parties.
As a joke.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just as a bad singer.
Right.
You know.
And of course, I wouldn't have gotten that because I would have only known her from that Traviata.
Well, most people only knew her early stuff and avoided things like the Thais, like the plague, because they were just so awful. But, so many people loved her. And I thought, okay, there's got to be something here that I'm missing. And when I did that, I came away with a much deeper appreciation and respect.
Well, the
for
thing
her.
that's interesting about it is I think that I have 0.1% of your opera knowledge. Like I have this tiny little piece, but yet I probably have 98% more than the average person on the street, just because the average person on the street has no knowledge at all. And so it's kind of interesting, I think, about your podcast. I mean, I love it. You discover so many new singers that you've never heard of. It's unbelievable that there are singers like Gilda Cruz-Romo, who just died and who you're releasing the episode today. I knew her because she was a voice teacher at University of Texas. She was a lovely lady, but honestly, I knew she'd sung at the Met. I didn't know there were any recordings of her. But you found
Well, there are no official studio recordings of Gilda, and that's the thing. And she was one of those, what back in the day they used to call, pirate divas, because they only existed on, like Leila Genser, like Virginia Zayani to a greater or lesser extent. People just.
How do you get these pirate recordings? How did you get all the Gilda recordings?
Most of them came off of YouTube. Or, and I have my sources.
Right.
No, I have a wonderful listener in Australia who a couple of years ago sent me all of these live recordings that were from the person who had originally done the recordings, who snuck the recording equipment into City Opera.
How were people recording things in 1970? And
with great stealth and,
but
assertiveness
did
and
they have
skill.
like a cassette recorder? I mean,
No, these were reel-to-reels.
they were doing reel-to-reel.
Yes, cassettes didn't exist.
That's crazy.
I know it. It's unbelievable. And,
Do you think
and there are
people had to
various...
know, and they had to just be turning a blind eye? Like the ushers had to have seen that.
Well, there's the whole question of... I actually, sometimes I index books, and I indexed a scholarly book about documentation of Broadway performances, and he specifically talked about pirate recordings of Broadway shows. And a lot of times, the composers actually wanted the work to be recorded because it assured that it would have a life afterwards. So I don't know, but people have written books about, pirate opera recordings and things. Yeah, there's some real experts. I'm not an expert.
So you have 300 episodes.
375.
375 episodes.
Plus, as of this weekend, 150 bonus episodes.
It's an incredibly large...
It's my life.
Yeah.
Andrew, honestly.
So I guess what has the podcast meant to you? And it's your legacy.
The podcast, yes, it is my legacy. The podcast saved my life, first of all. It gave me an outlet to talk about the stuff that I've been listening to and cleaning out over my entire life. Yeah. I have a little bit of an axe to grind with the way that people sing these days. I'm not going to go on my podcast and criticize the singers of today. In fact, I don't know if you've listened to them. I've done a number of episodes on young singers I admire. Mm-hmm. And there are singers that I legitimately am in awe of.
Who are some of the young ones that you love?
Oh, Hugh Montague Rendell is way up at the top. Lisette Oropesa, among the countertenors, John Holiday.
Lisette Oropesa has an enormous social media following.
Yeah, but she does it so skillfully. She does it so skillfully, I think. And, there are a lot of mezzos. I discovered a mezzo named Beth Taylor, who's fantastic. Oh, my God, there's so many of them. And I will also add that I know that certain colleagues of mine who teach in schools recommend the podcast for their students because it's an unending resource to learn about singing. And I do not criticize, as I was saying, I don't criticize people that I don't like. I just don't talk about them.
Right.
I don't talk about them because I can be just as passionate about what I don't like as what I do like. And I just thought there's so much negativity in the world. And this was before everything really went to hell with people being so viciously cruel to each other. I just thought, why talk about things that I don't like?
So during your first season, I thought, well, what's he going to do when we heard all the singers of yesteryear that
I have a book filled with episodes that have yet been done. And furthermore, here's one thing. I have, from the very beginning, before Black Lives Matter became a thing, before anything, I was foregrounding artists of color. And why did I do that? Because I felt like I was repaying a debt. Because it was Leontyne who brought that world to me, who opened that whole world up for me. And from there, my whole life changed. And so how could I not celebrate those artists? And when you think about the number of artists of color that you don't know about. So I have always foregrounded artists of color.
do you have like an episode you're like, hey, I don't know opera very well, but I'm kind of interested?
I do episodes also on pop singers. Dusty Springfield is my most favorite pop singer. And I would say it might behoove people to just look through the set list, see if there are any names that they recognize. Also the potpourri episodes that I do, where sometimes I'll just do something about Dan's favorites or something where I'll play a whole range of things. Those might be a good place to start. But Andrew, the thing is, we're talking about how people that really know a lot about singing get a lot out of the podcasts. But it's equally true that people who don't know about singing also can learn a lot and can develop a sense of what they like just by listening to it. And because I try, David has said this to me before, you need to talk about why something's good. You can't just play something. You have to talk about what's interesting about a particular artist. And, he always did this with his students. He would say, the question was, why should I care? And so I always try to start each episode answering that question, why should I care about a given artist?
You said the podcast saved your life and gave you this purpose. But I also imagine that the longer you do it, the more you get feedback from folks and meet interesting people and meet new sources.
Oh my God, there are famous people that love my podcast. It just blows my mind.
I did reach out to people to send Gilda her episode before she died.
Yes.
I don't know. Well,
I talk about it on the episode.
Yeah.
I said I hope that she was made aware of it.
Yeah.
Do you know how much people adored her? There are some guys that were going to City Opera and the Met in the early 70s. She was like their preferred diva. And when you listen to those recordings, you hear why. She was so extraordinary.
Well, I think she got, I guess, her native language being Spanish and having the high float, that she sort of got associated with Montserrat Caballé and lived in the shadow.
Did she? Oh, I never thought of her in the same... No, I thought of her as being second string to Scotto. That's what I thought of her as being.
Interesting.
Because that's kind of how the Met ended up treating her.
So, what I heard about you moving to Berlin is that you had to move out of your apartment in New York, and David, your ex, you'd been to Berlin to visit him a couple of times. It was like...
No, I went to visit him that summer. And when I got back was when Gloria said to me, okay, I'm leaving New York.
You didn't choose Berlin because you had this lifelong desire to move to Berlin.
Absolutely
You
not.
didn't
Absolutely not.
And you really didn't choose to move to Germany. It was like,
No, if I could have lived anywhere, I would have moved to Paris.
so
Or
that's,
Italy.
that's the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is that the opportunity presented itself for you to move to Berlin, and you moved to Berlin.
Yeah. I mean, I already knew Berlin because I had spent time here.
And so it was
I
easy.
spent time in Germany. I knew what the pitfalls were, shall we say. It's a challenging place to live. Of course, I didn't have a plan to move. Okay, oh God, this is so complicated, as I start to think about it. But whose life isn't complicated? I first went over to Germany to do an audition tour it was right after I turned 40.
So it was early
On my
2000s.
birthday. I went over there in the fall of 1999.
Is German your best second language?
It used to be French.
Right. So if you moved to Paris,
I
things would have been different.
Yeah. If I had moved to Paris, it would have been different. Yeah.
Was there a shift where you thought, I might be in Germany forever? Or
No. Okay. So I came over and I did the audition tour and I got hired for one gig. And that was singing Saul, the role of David in Saul, with Helmut Rilling in Stuttgart. And I went and I had an enormous success, and immediately he hired me for all these subsequent projects. Now, okay, that was all well and good. Then I went and sang the first thing with him. That was a Christmas oratorio that following December in Athens. And I could tell that he wasn't happy with it because he started making strange comments about my singing and all of this. And when I did the solo, it was like people were saying to me, how many times have you worked with him before? One of my colleagues said this to me. I said, I've never worked with him before. And she said, I've never seen him treat another singer the way that he's treating you. And I thought, why? It didn't, I mean, I knew I had done an okay job.
do you have a recording of that?
Yes. Anyway, so then he hired me to do, the next day they called and said, we want you to go to Salzburg, to the Easter Festival in Salzburg, and do Haymore in Jephthah, and to repeat it at the Oregon Bach Festival. And then he said, oh, and by the way, someone just dropped out of a Christmas oratorio in Athens, so can you come and do that as well? And I said, yes, I can do that. And then he also hired me to sing a Vivaldi program, and that would have been in the fall of 2001. So I was getting ready to travel over there, and September 11th happened. And there were no flights coming and going for a while. I had a flight at the very beginning of October that I had already booked, and they just started opening up flights right before I went. The concerts weren't until December. I wanted to be there for a while just to
acclimate yourself.
to just be there. And I saved up the money I needed, and I had a place to stay. So anyway, I went. The week after I arrived, there started being counter demonstrations against the United States in downtown Stuttgart. And I just thought, oh dear. And my Canadian friends were being accused of being American, and they were trying to distance themselves. And meanwhile, I was thinking, God, do I have to pretend I'm like Canadian or something? Anyway, it was not a good time to be there. So there was a lot of stress surrounding all of this, and I had to sing those concerts. And here's the other thing that Helmut Rilling did. There were vocal soloist parts for 4 different voice types. But because, as the artistic administrator said to me, we're trying to save money, they decided to give me parts, solos to sing for both second soprano and alto and second bass up an octave, and there was maybe even a tenor thing. And it was nearly impossible to do. And I had a lot of distress over this, and he was very unhappy. And the final show that we did was a private concert for Doctors Without Borders, which was filmed and shown on television. And I was on my way back because I had gigs in San Francisco coming up at Christmas time. So I was on the flight back to the US, and they had already called and fired me for every single gig that he had hired me for.
Oh my!
Because he said that, I was just an embarrassment and he couldn't be associated with me.
Oh.
I went and someone said this to me, an agent in New York said to me, "Oh, is he turned on you yet? Because he will." And I said, "That's nonsense. He won't do that because we such a wonderful working relationship and he just loves me." It's exactly what he did.
So he
exactly what he did. And plus that, not only that, but I was having a horrible diabetic reaction. My blood sugar was so high. No, it happens sometimes. It wasn't from stress necessarily. I don't think it was. It's just some days it's really impossible to get regulated. And so I sang the entire first half of the concert with my blood sugar so high. And then in the intermission, it went down so low, I don't know how I even got through the concert. There was never any question of how I was or anything. They just fired me. They just fucking fired me. There was no loyalty. So then at that point, I went for about a year without another job. It ended up being a world premiere at the Bastille in Paris. And while I was there, I sang an audition for a composer who was writing a world premiere for the Châtelet the following season. So I had those 2 gigs. And I never had one of those careers that just gained momentum and went up and up and up. It was a gig there, then 6 months to a year with nothing, and then another gig. And then maybe on the basis of that gig, I would get hired for something else, but it wouldn't be for another long period of time. And I never had an agent who believed in me or who understood what I was about and supported me or defended me or whatever. I never had that. And plus that, I had this wonderful ability to kind of sabotage myself. Mm-hmm. And not only that, I was in a relationship. We had been together for many years. When we got together, I was a pianist. He was a singer. Then he decided he couldn't take it anymore, and he quit singing, and he became an agent. But then he was very jealous when I started getting work that was at a much higher level than he had ever had. And so he would sabotage me every time I was going off to do a job. He would start a huge fight with me, right, as we were driving to the airport. That relationship didn't last. I'm no longer resentful. I mean, I had the career that I had. I had the success that I had. The best parts of it always were the response that I would get from the audiences, because the audiences got it much more than the administrators did. When I was singing at the Châtelet, the agent that I had at that point was trying to get them to hire me for something else. And they said to him, "Oh, he arrived and we were so interested in him. We thought he was really wonderful. But then, when we actually saw him on stage, we just decided he's not good enough for us. And I hear the recording of what I did, and it was stunning. It was so good. And the same thing with that telecast that was on German television after that Vivaldi. Somebody wrote, all of a sudden people would write to me out of the blue, and they'd say, when are you coming back to Germany, and whatever happened to you, and stuff like this, because they would find me on my website. And I would say, why are all these people writing to me? And I wrote to someone and I asked them, and they said, oh, because you were just on television. And I was like, I was? And then for a very brief period of time, and unfortunately I didn't download it, but the concert was up on YouTube. And I watched it, and I saw it, and in my head, I had thought that it was the worst singing I could have possibly done. Great. And it was very good. It wasn't my absolute best, but it was really good singing. I saw that and I thought, I've been trying so hard to make myself into something that I thought people wanted me to be, instead of just being myself. In the end, it really was the diabetes, in spite of the fact that I had really pretty decent control. Mm-hmm. It was just too volatile. There were things that I couldn't control, and then I ended up looking inconsistent because of my health. As I got older, it became more and more of an issue, I guess. Anyway, so it never was a career that had a lot of momentum. But like when I sang that opera at the Châtelet, for instance, in spite of the fact that the management thought that I was no good, for instance, the composer's mother said the most amazing things to me. So I know that I had this gift, but nobody stood behind me. Nobody believed in me. And I certainly didn't have the confidence to do it. And so that ended up being, more or less, that was the last big gig that I ever did.
Moi de tes mots, afin d'étirer et de vaincre le temps.
The Châtelet. And I never got hired for anything on that level again. And William Christie, by the way, this was, when I did that audition a couple of years later, the agent called me. I remember I was going to the Centre Pompidou to go to the museum, and he called me and he said, well, I got some feedback from William Christie's office. I said, oh, what did they say? They said that of all the auditions he's ever heard, it was by far the worst audition they've ever heard. So thanks a lot. I was trying to be what I thought, because I listened to the kind of singers that William Christie was hiring. And I was trying to take the vibrato out of my sound or something. Yeah, because I always sounded like a female alto. This is, okay, so I've just been telling all these self-deprecating stories. Let me tell you about one of the most wonderful things that ever happened to me in my career. This old man in the Netherlands wrote to me, and he had read about me on some website that somebody kept, some blog about countertenors. And it said specifically that I had a recording of Danny Boy on my website, and that in the assessment of this person that I sounded more like Kathleen Ferrier than any countertenor they had ever heard. Well, Kathleen Ferrier was merely one of the greatest contraltos of all time. And this person said to me, could you please send me that recording? He said, I have been looking my whole life because right after the war, I heard Kathleen Ferrier singing on the radio, Danny Boy. And there's no recording of her singing it because there isn't one. So I sent it to him, and he wrote back to me, and he said he was in his study, and he was listening to the recording. And his wife came running into the room, and she said, "You found it! You found it!" Because she thought it was Kathleen Ferrier. As we used to say anyway, that and a token will get you on the subway. You know, I mean, honestly, I just never had a lucrative career. But when I think of it in those terms, I was very successful. And then I went for a long time. After I moved here, I tried to start doing
The cabaret stuff.
the cabaret. But as I mentioned,
Making any money.
I wasn't making any money. I would be lucky if I took home €50 after a night like that.
Okay, so now we're kind of in the zone where, you know, you've moved to Berlin. Not really suddenly. You had just been here, but
Well, so
you came back to live.
David was, you know, we had broken up by then, but he was going back and forth to Berlin because he had a fellowship at the Freie Universität. And it was a 12-month long fellowship that could be divided up in any way that he wanted to. So he was coming and going from Berlin quite a bit.
He's going back to New York.
Because he taught at the Graduate Center, yes, in New York. So the CUNY Graduate Center. Anyway, I was just having a do-nothing summer, basically, in New York. And he invited me to come and visit for 2 weeks.
2012?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think so. Anyway, I just thought, why don't I just get a pied-à-terre here? And then when David comes and goes for his fellowship, we'll just live together in the times that he's there. The rest of the time, I'll just hold down the fort here. And, I'll try and make it work here in Germany. That was the reason I chose to come to Germany. It wasn't because I had any desire to come back here. If I had wanted to move to Germany, I would have moved 12 years earlier when I had first done that job with Helmut Rilling.
So David had the 12-month fellowship. So you imagine that you'd probably be here for a year or so? Or like, you know, that you would...
No, because he was quite clear that he was nearing retirement age and he wanted to settle here.
Okay.
He wanted to retire here. And in fact, he has done so. You know, so I was moving here to move here. But I didn't do anything about trying to secure a visa or anything until it was almost too late.
A lot of folks in America talk about moving to another country or looking for a just-in-case place to settle to due to the political situation. And I don't think a lot of them think about the actual, like...
practicalities.
Yes. How do you do that? How do you hear all these cries about we like legal immigrants, not illegal immigrants. And like, how do you legally
Germany's
immigrate?
the same way. Angela Merkel opened up the borders for people coming from the Middle East, and there was such an outcry. And so within a matter of months, she shut everything up again. And this is something that is so distressing to me. There is such backlash against foreigners, people coming in to Germany from the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. So here's the thing, and I'm like an American listener. I think, well, I'm not a Muslim from the Middle East. It should be easy for me to move to Berlin. But I know that it hasn't been that easy for you. So, I mean, like...
Well, look, Andrew, it's all predicated on how much money you make. And I don't make any money.
So basically, it's an income-based decision.
It's completely income-based. So you have to be able to, you really should have 6 figures of income before you even think about coming over here.
That you're going to continue to make.
Or a job. You have to have a job, preferably in Germany. You know, like if you have like a big corporate job where they can send you to work in their German office,
Right.
that would be an ideal way of coming over here. I didn't come over here
Right.
like that. I had guidance from a friend who knew how to handle the Foreign Office, the Ausländerbehörde. And so she gave me advice. It was belated advice when it finally came to me, but I followed everything she told me to do. And that's how I got my visa.
And you were getting like 5-year visas, or I don't know.
Oh, no, not at the beginning. No, I've never had a 5-year visa in my life. No, they give it to you for 1 year at first.
So you're getting like 1 year.
So I got
visas.
1 year first, and then
And it's expensive? No.
no, I didn't have a lawyer the first time I
Right.
went. The first 2 times I went, I just went with a friend who spoke some German. No, you have to file a shitload of papers, though. Huge stack of papers. And they love, you know, in Germany, I think they're going a little bit more with online things now. But you used to have to just take all of the papers in there and they would just go through them all. Your taxes, proof of your banking, proof that you have health insurance, your registration because you have to register when you have an apartment here. You have to register your apartment and your residency.
David have dual citizenship?
No. No,
So
it doesn't suit him
Does
for
it go
tax
or does
purposes.
that the same? Does he go through the same rigmarole that you?
No. First of all, because he's a quasi-famous person and he's written like 10, 12 books. So more than that, he actually has generous investments and everything. And so I don't have any of that. So it's never a problem for him. But something did happen to him once. When you're on just a tourist visa, you can only be here for 3 months at a time, 90 days. Then you have to leave for 90 days. And then you can come back again for 90 days. So you can spend a total of 180 days a year here, but with 90-day intervals in between.
Gotcha.
And so David was going back and forth. And at that point, you know, they don't really stamp your passport
right.
or anything.
Right.
And so they thought that he was living here illegally. So he had to go to the town hall to really register his residence, which he hadn't done properly. Anyway, that was really scary for him. So in spite of the fact that now he's kind of made in the shade, we've had a lawyer now that we've used for probably about 8 or 9 years who's helped us every time. I won't go out there alone anymore. It's scary. It's not a friendly place.
So you applied for dual citizenship 2 years ago.
Almost, yeah.
Almost.
Yeah.
And that costs money.
Yeah, it costs money. About €300, something like that. If you're going to give up your U.S. citizenship, you know you have to pay for that too.
Really?
Yeah, like $3,000, $3,500, something like that.
So what's the process for becoming a dual citizen?
Well, everything changed on January 1st, 2024. But before that, they would only make exceptions for people who wanted German citizenship, but who wanted to retain their
So
present
before you had to
citizenship.
renounce your previous.
So normally you would have to renounce it unless you could present ample evidence as to why. And when I submitted my application, that was still the law. So my lawyer had to help
make a statement.
make
about
a
why.
statement about why I wanted to retain my U.S. citizenship. Now, that's no longer the case. As of January 1st, the whole method by which one applies, you used to go to the local town hall to register to become a German citizen. Now it's all done through a national bureau instead, and it's called the Landesamt für Einwanderung. So the National Office for Immigration, basically.
I'm just curious. Do you know, like, how much guaranteed income would someone need to show to like smooth their path?
Okay, the last time I went out there, my lawyer said to me, "Look, your German's so good. Let's just ask them to consider you for permanent residency." She said, "I want you to tell them a little bit about your podcast and the cultural value of what you're doing." A lot of the stuff that I talk about is singers who either are German or who came
Sing in
over
German.
here.
They all sing in German.
Well, a lot of them do.
And a lot of the performances were recorded in Germany.
Yeah. So anyway, I went in and for like 10 minutes or so, I just sort of foamed at the mouth about, as I am wont to do, but in German this time, about all the stuff that I do with my podcast. And then we went out and sat and waited, because that's what you do after you present all your papers. Half hour later or so, they called us back in and said, well, we're giving you 3 years, because that's generally what I get now when I go to renew my visa, my residency visa. But I'm sorry, you're not eligible for permanent residency, because as a freelance artist, you have to have 250,000 euro liquid to qualify. Now tell me, what freelance artist has that kind of money in their pockets unless they are a trust fund baby?
Yeah.
So they want the trust fund babies. They want them.
Yeah.
They don't want me.
Well, I mean, Donald Trump was talking about the gold visa or whatever.
Yeah, that's right.
For $5 million.
Yeah, it's the same. I mean, it's not as much money.
But it's similar.
Yes,
So,
basically.
the situation you're in now is that your visa...
It's going to expire in September. And I swore to myself the last time I went out to that Ausländerbehörde, the foreign office, that I would never go again. And guess what? I got to go again, because there's no way that my application will be processed by the time my visa expires.
You'll go with your lawyer again, and you'll explain the podcast.
No, we have to do all the same nonsense all over again. Now, once you've done it 6 or 7 times, as I have, it's not as stressful or complicated, but it's still, you have to pay. Do you know how much it costs to have your taxes prepared here? I don't think I even owe German taxes, but it costs me almost 1,000 euro to have my taxes done here. And they can't charge you a cut rate, because there is a set fee that all professionals must charge. You can't underprice yourself so more people will use your services. That's not how it works here. If you have done all of the Ausbildung,
and they don't have like a TurboTax or an online...
They do now, but I wouldn't dare do that. Who's going to answer if I do something wrong? I'm willing to pay that money, because if I make a mistake, someone will back me up.
Right.
I don't want to be out there all by myself. Same reason I take a lawyer out there. Now, lawyers here don't charge as much as lawyers in the U.S. do.
They're not charging like $250 an hour.
No, I think for the whole process, my lawyer, she has to do a power of attorney, and then I just pay her. I don't know. It ends up costing me about 400 euro for the whole thing. It's really quite reasonable. In the terms
Plus
of
the 300 for the application.
No. To renew a residency permit, I think now is 60.
Oh, okay.
60 euro. Yeah.
Okay.
And then you get a card. I have a card now. They used to put a sticker in your passport. Now they send you a card. And, you can get a Fiktionsbescheinigung, which if your visa is about to expire, they'll give you something that says, that you've renewed your visa, because I'm probably going to end up having to go back to the U.S. very soon, because I have an ailing parent who's not going to live much longer. And so this is why it's really important for me to resolve this now, ASAP. That's why I wanted to have the dual citizenship, because then I wouldn't have to worry about it ever again. Now I'm not sure how I'm even going to handle it. My lawyer told me when we discussed it recently that I need to reapply doing it online, because as of January 1st, they no longer accept paper applications. You do it all through the federal agency, and you do it all online. So I'd have to reapply and pay the fee all over again, because they don't waiver the fee if you've already done it. So you go to the website where you do this. The first thing on the website, it says, if you've applied for citizenship before January 1st, 2024, please do not reapply.
And your lawyer's telling you have to reapply.
Well, she talked to them. That's what they told her.
Right.
So they talk out of both sides of their mouth. Everybody thinks Germany is so A, organized, and B, efficient. they're neither organized nor efficient. What they are, and this is a big difference, they're thorough. So they will go back over the same step 5 or 6 times. But you go to an office and you speak to one person, they'll tell you one story. You go the next week, you speak to another person, they'll tell you a completely different story. So you never know what end is up. And
you're constantly looking for the person who's going to not only give you the answer you want to hear, but be able to manifest the results you want to result.
Right, but the thing is, in smaller cities, you get a caseworker assigned to you through the whole process. That does not happen here. It's the luck of the draw. Whoever picks your number and calls you into the office on the day that you have your appointment.
So you basically are sort of
That's why I go with my lawyer, because she knows them all. I go in with her, and that gives me a certain amount of cachet. Also, I mean, by now, I've been here for 12 years. They tell you, once you have been here for 60 consecutive months with health insurance and paying into a pension fund, you are qualified to apply for either permanent residency or citizenship. I waited a long time to do that. The other thing that happened, Andrew, is that COVID happened, or corona, as they call it here. So everything ground to a halt with corona.
So you got your last one in 2022.
So you don't even, you used to have appointments in person. There is no such thing as an in-person appointment to get citizenship now. They look at your papers, they make the decision, or the files that you scanned and submitted and your application, and then they will accept or reject it as, or say you're missing this and this and this document, finish that and come back.
So finally, I guess talking about your podcast, I'm about to ask a personal question that I know you won't answer, but I'm curious about it. You're not making enough money off the podcast.
No,
for the German people to say he's got us income.
Yeah, but you know what? I'm not based in Germany either.
Oh, Patreon's not based here. Or the money.
Nothing is based in Germany. It's all based in the US. And the reason for that is because they have very strict copyright laws. And I play a lot of music on my podcast.
America allows you to play it, whereas Germany wouldn't.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I haven't been called on the carpet yet. If somebody decided that they were going to take me down, I suppose they could. But I've consulted with copyright lawyers. A big name who did a lot of work for NPR. And what he said to me was, they won't shut you down altogether anyway. They may take issue with a given podcast episode. But the argument one uses is fair use and that it is for educational purposes. And it is. It is. Because that is a huge reason that I do the podcast is to help people educate their ears as to what really beautiful and superb singing is.
Well, so much of the music that was composed over 100 years ago. And then a lot of
the recordings.
But a lot of them are, I just listened to Gilda Cruz-Romo's today. It's all bootlegged recordings.
Yes, but where are those performances from? What company? And if the company decides they don't want you playing their recordings, that's a different question. So it has to do with a lot of different factors. It's not just if the music is in copyright, if the recording is in copyright, or if it is from the stage of an opera company that doesn't want you to be playing stuff.
Well, for listeners out there, please check out Counter Melody Podcast.
Well, to find it on Patreon, it's patreon.com/countermelody.
Counter Melody.
Yeah. But countermelodypodcast.com is the dedicated page for the podcast. And there's a player on there. Every single episode has a dedicated page. And it has a player at the top of it so that you can either stream or download the episodes from there. Plus a complete set list, plus lots and lots of really interesting supplementary material, photos, stuff like that.
And I mean, I hear things I've never heard before all the time.
But I have people who are really famous opera professionals who are hearing
things for the
stuff
first time
that they didn't know about before. That's the kind of singer that I really like doing on the podcast.
The interview you just heard was recorded in July, in person, in Berlin. The episode was delayed at the request of our guest. He and I recorded an update just a few days ago. Daniel, thanks so much for joining me via Zoom. We held off on releasing your episode because I knew your mother was very ill. I'm so sorry for your loss. We're recording this now after you've been home for the funeral. We're also recording it after I assume you've renewed your visa.
Oh, my friend, that is a big assumption.
Okay, well, update us from what listeners have heard.
First of all, I just have to say, you were so kind to put that episode together. And when I listened to it, I was really kind of shocked by my whiny tone. And I know you told me that it was raw and that people would appreciate it, but I just thought I sounded like a raving bitch. So I think with these recent losses, I'm putting some things in perspective. But I have to tell you, no, the visa is not renewed. It's not renewed. It expired on September 19th. And the immigration system is really at sixes and sevens here. They keep changing the rules. They keep changing the requirements. Our lawyer doesn't even know what end is up. And when I returned to Germany from the funeral, I was held up at immigration and upbraided for not having already taken care of my visa. And I said, look, I hadn't gotten all my papers together. This was an emergency trip. I wouldn't have gone if I hadn't had to. And he goes, you don't have any other papers? I had to just be very apologetic. You now have to be bringing in to live in Germany as a foreigner. You have to bring in 2,500 euro net every month. I can't remember if I mentioned that the last time, but that is it's a real sticking point. And I think
2,500 net. So a couple of questions about that, having done at this point a couple of other interviews of folks who've moved abroad. I just interviewed somebody in Spain, and she is on a digital nomad visa. So she has a certain income requirement that she has to be making outside of Spain. So yours is, I can tell by the looking at your face that you need to make 2,500 in Germany.
Well, I'm making my money outside of Germany anyway, but it's listed on my tax return in Germany.
Gotcha.
So it counts, but it counts for nothing because I make nowhere near that amount.
Mm-hmm.
So, even though I've lived here now for 13 years, I think if I didn't have David vouching for me and taking financial responsibility from me, that they might just kick me out. And I think they're doing it because they're trying to keep all of these people who are fleeing various situations, either in the United States or the Middle East, and the various conflicts there.
I wanted to talk about you traveling back to Wisconsin for your mother's funeral and being back in the United States and any observations that you had.
Well, Andrew, on this trip, I was really cocooning. When I was not dealing with family outright, I really was just keeping very low. But I can tell you that over the past year, with my mother ailing, I took numerous extended trips to the United States, including just at the time of the election last year, at the time of the inauguration last year, and prior to that, at the time of the Republican convention in Milwaukee, where I was staying. So I did observe some things. I saw people carrying guns into restaurants, which really alarmed me. I saw people just walking around in paramilitary garb. This was back in February. I mean, this is before ICE started doing anything. Now, I flew in and out of O'Hare. They've really had some very serious incursions and invasions on the part of ICE, to which people are, I think, and the governor are really standing up. But it's a free-for-all. It is a free-for-all, people.
With the visa drama and you admittedly being very dependent on your partner, David, to vouch for you, the prospect of not getting the visa and having to return to America, what does that feel like?
It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Our lawyer has assured us that it will go through.
I guess another way of phrasing the question is like, how would it feel for you to have to consider moving back to America?
Andrew, it's such a strange thing because it's still my home and I miss it. And just driving through the countryside on my way to visit my favorite cousin, I guess, was that just last week? It was barely a week ago. Oh my God. Anyway, there is such a feeling of that being my home. Germany will never feel like my home, but I am so grateful to have a place here where I don't have to worry about my insurance and getting the health care that I need. You know, as a diabetic, that's extraordinarily important. I can't remember if I mentioned this before, but I have to pay a copay to get some of my medications. All of my diabetic supplies are provided, but I have to pay a nominal fee, €10 for 5 vials of insulin. And that's nothing, but my diabetes doctor is quite outraged by this. She says it's outrageous that you should have to pay any money whatsoever for a medication that you can't live without. And I don't know how they justify that. I'm, everything in Germany is so highly regulated, so I'm sure there's a justification for that. But believe me, I ain't complaining. I know how lucky I am. And I think I was complaining an awful lot on our prior talk as we sat opposite each other just at our dining room table. But it's frustrating in some ways, but I have absolutely no intention of ever returning to the U.S. And I don't think I really did before the prior election or, 2 elections before that. I mean, I was living in our prior apartment when 45 happened. I went
Trump's
to bed
first
at
election,
night.
yeah.
Yes, exactly. I was watching the returns on Democracy Now! And I thought, okay, everything's okay. I'm just going to go to bed. Turned out and I woke up very early in the morning and checked the news and it had already flipped. And, I am a bit of a drama queen anyway, but that was just so alarming to me, as was this last. And I was in the United States for that last election. And I had been campaigning a couple days before with one of my best friends. And I think everybody just was not, I don't know, maybe I was just naive. I wasn't expecting it. Anyway, so what needs to be done regarding my visa now is that I have all of the documents together. We just have to upload everything to the website. You can't even start the application until you have absolutely every document that you need. I finally have that. It's a frustrating thing because I was saying to my lawyer since the beginning of the year, I do not want my visa to expire and me not be able to go home from my mother's funeral when that happens. And she said, don't worry, it won't happen, happen. But, both on my way out and on my way back in, I got called on the carpet about it. I did. Because I was relying on other people, the tax accountant here, just let it slide. There was a profit and loss statement that I absolutely had to have. I gave her all the material I thought I needed. I waited for 2 weeks and didn't hear anything. Then I wrote to her and I said, look, I'm going to have to go to the U.S. at any minute. I'm going to be called away. what do I need to get this done? And she said, oh, yeah, I forgot. You need to send this, and this. I was like, well, you had 2 weeks to ask me to do that. Why didn't you ask me before? And then she actually wrote to me and she said, I don't know how you are making ends meet. I don't even know how to prepare a profit and loss statement for you because your income is so low. And a lawyer explained this to me. She said, oh, she thinks you're getting money under the table, but she doesn't want to come out and say it. She thinks you're making a ton of money under the radar and not reporting it. And I wrote back to her and I said, may I assure you that my podcast is a full-time job. I don't have time to be earning any other kind of money. Whether, I'm a little old to be walking the street and I'm a little too tired and frustrated to be teaching voice.
If you were to recommend a book to our listeners, what would it be?
I read a book a couple of years ago by a scholar named Kira Thurman. And the book is called Singing Like Germans, Black Musicians in the Land of Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms. And it's by the African-American scholar Kira Thurman, who, let's see, she's assistant professor of history and Germanic languages and literatures at the University of Michigan. And she grew up in Vienna.
Oh, very cool.
It's all about African-American classical singers in Europe. And at the very beginning, they talk about Grace Bumbry's appearance at Bayreuth.
Grace Bumbry at Bayreuth.
Yes, and
she
her
did
appearance as Venus. Yeah, it goes back to as early as the years right after the Civil War, when, of course, Black classical singers or musicians couldn't get hired to do anything in the United States. Anyway, it's a fascinating
and you know what's
study.
interesting? Because we were just talking about this, about racism in Europe and racism in Germany in particular.
Right.
But what you hear from so many African-American expatriates is they moved to Europe because they felt that the racism was so much less.
It's of a different stripe. And the racism in the former East Germany was of a very particular kind. But even though they had anti-racist language written into their constitution, there are just ways in which it manifests itself anyway, at any rate, even against their good intentions. It's just a way of getting some perspective on what it was like and what it still is like for artists of color who are trying to have careers in classical music and opera and concert work in particular. So, yeah, that's what I would recommend. I really love that book.
Daniel Gundlach, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Andrew, oh my goodness, it's been a joy. Good luck trying to piece something together out of this talk.
That will be fun.
To find Daniel's podcast, visit countermelodypodcast.com. Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@akleg.gov or call 907-269-0123.